November 14, 1942, the Solomon Islands Pacific Theater. Altitude 25,000 feet. The air above the emerald jungle canopy was a silent, lethal void, only broken by the rhythmic thunder of 4 Pratt & Whitney engines. This was the sound of America's industrial might, embodied in 65,000 pounds of metal. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. For the crew of the B-17E, nicknamed the Yankee Doodle, the mission was routine, but the stakes were anything but. They were a silver spearhead, confident in the machine they flew. A machine built on a bold, almost arrogant strategic premise. The underlying premise of the B-17 was revolutionary, even audacious. Daylight precision bombing would win the war, and the bomber, bristling with machine guns, would be its own protector, a flying fortress. American doctrine was clear. Massed formations of B-17s, interlocking their fields of fire, would create a wall of steel impervious to fighter attack. The irony, the profound historical contradiction we must now explore, is that this very confidence, this belief in the impenetrable shield of the B-17, blinded the Allies to its critical vulnerabilities, and simultaneously, it instilled a terrifying new reality into the minds of its enemies. The Axis powers did not fear the bomber until they understood how it thought. In the early years, the Axis pilots, especially the battle-hardened veterans of the Luftwaffe and the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service, INAS, laughed at the concept. They had grown accustomed to British nighttime incursions and the occasional, lightly armed American prototypes. When they first encountered the early B-17 models, they noted the numerous gun positions, but scoffed at their seemingly limited effectiveness. A large, slow target, one Messerschmitt pilot reportedly summarized it, a great metal whale to be harpooned at will. But the fortress was evolving rapidly, faster than the intelligence reports could travel. As the war raged into 1942, the B-17E and its successor, the B-17F, began arriving. This was a different beast. The key visual change was the inclusion of the Sperry-designed Bendix chin turret and the remote-controlled B-17F ball turret, giving the bomber true ventral and frontal coverage, turning its blind spots into kill zones. It was no longer just a bomber. It was an integrated weapons platform. The men inside, young and often terrified, clung to the fortress as their only sanctuary. Tail gunners, waist gunners, and the ball turret gunners, often claustrophobic and isolated, were collectively responsible for 13 individual 50-caliber Browning M2 machine guns. The volume of fire was staggering. A single B-17 could deliver over 1,600 rounds per minute. A formation of 50 could unleash a torrent of fire unmatched in aerial warfare. Back over the Solomons in November 1942, the Yankee Doodle was separated from its formation. Whether due to engine trouble, navigational error, or a relentless pursuit by Mitsubishi A6M0s, the details are murky. What is certain is the result. A catastrophic failure on the starboard wing forced the pilot, Major Frank C. Jones, to execute a crash landing on a remote Japanese-held island airstrip. The crew were captured, but the true prize was the bomber itself. The Japanese High Command saw a moment of unparalleled opportunity. They had captured a complete, fully functioning example of the enemy's most vaunted weapon. This was not a wrecked hulk. This was a technological museum delivered directly to their doorstep. The bomber was quickly secured, patched up, and given a new identity, the Japanese designation Type 101. Its destination mainland Japan for a secret, intensive technical evaluation. What they were about to discover, what the enemy pilots had consistently failed to grasp through the chaos of combat, was not merely the number of guns, but the genius behind the fire control system that integrated them. They would soon learn that the American approach was not brute force, but calculated automated lethality. The laugh that the Axis pilots had shared would soon turn into a cold, psychological dread. The story of the Yankee Doodle's final mission was just beginning. The secrets locked within this captured machine would soon rewrite the Japanese manual on intercepting Allied heavy bombers. If you're fascinated by the untold technological stories and strategic shifts of World War II, hit that subscribe button now and join us as we unlock the next chapter of the Fortress test. The captured B-17, designated Type 101, arrived at the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force Technical Research Institute in Fusa, now Yokota Air Base. It was here, far from the battle lines, that the methodical dissection began. Lead engineers, typically focused on the graceful, lightweight designs of the Zero, were confronted with a machine built on a completely different philosophy: survivability through mass production and concentrated firepower. Initial Japanese assessments were, predictably, critical of its speed and maneuverability. "It is clumsy, heavy, and slow," one engineer noted in his report. "It sacrifices performance for mere protection," but the longer they studied it, the more their initial contempt was replaced by a creeping, uneasy respect, and then by outright alarm. The revelation was not the individual machine guns, the 50 caliber Browning M2, which they acknowledged was a superb weapon, but the complex integrated system that allowed those guns to be aimed with deadly precision under extreme combat stress. The secret lay in the American industrial marvel, the Sperry Ball turret and the Sperry A1 autopilot. The Sperry system was a symphony of electromechanical engineering. It provided a degree of defensive accuracy the Japanese and Germans had only dreamed of. Unlike their own manually aimed guns, the B-17 utilized the Mark 50 computing site in the powered turrets. This was not merely a ring and bead, this was a rudimentary mechanical computer that calculated the lead required to hit an enemy fighter moving at high speed relative to the bomber's own speed, altitude, and direction. A transcript from a debriefing of a Japanese engineer, Lieutenant Kenji Ito, after inspecting the Bull turret's operation, reveals the moment of shock. "We were astonished. Our men were trained to estimate the lead distance, a dangerous subjective art requiring hundreds of hours of flying. The Americans, they built a machine to do the trigonometry. The gunner does not aim at the plane, he simply keeps the sight on it, and the system tells him where to fire. This is not a matter of pilot skill, it is a matter of superior mathematics and mass production." This technological advantage directly addressed the biggest variable in air combat: human error under G-forces and fear. Meanwhile, in Europe, the German Luftwaffe had its own captured B-17, known as Dornier 24, or later B-17F-27BO, which was part of the secret KG-200 experimental unit. The German technical studies mirrored the Japanese findings. They focused on the sheer volume of sustained fire. Consider the scale. The German fighters, such as the Focke-Wulf FW-190, were designed for high-speed head-on passes, a fraction of a second to aim and fire. The American gunner, protected by his power turret and assisted by his computing site, had a sustained, calculated rate of fire. Axis fighter fire time, 2 seconds of effective firing per pass. B-17 defensive fire, continuous calculated fire from multiple synchronized positions. Industrial scale. By the end of the war, Boeing and its partners would produce nearly 13,000 B-17s. This was a technological threat that could be mass-produced, unlike the highly specialized hand-built aircraft of the early Axis war effort. The Japanese pilots who first flew the captured B-17 did not just note the firepower, they noted the psychology of the defense. They saw a crew protected not just by armor plating, but by a machine that extended their sensory and calculating abilities. The bomber was a lethal shell, and every point of the compass was covered by a computed trajectory. The most damning realization was that their current fighter tactics, straight, high-speed approaches from the rear, were essentially flying directly into the B-17's best-defended quadrant. The American crews weren't just blindly spraying fire, they were utilizing a mathematically sound, automated defense grid. The Type 101 secrets, now unlocked, demanded a terrifying, immediate strategic adjustment. The Japanese and the Germans could not simply copy the technology, the manufacturing base was lacking, but they could and must change their tactics. The contempt was gone. What remained was the chilling acknowledgement. This was an enemy that had industrialized self-defense in the air. The technical reports were vital, but the true paradigm shift came from the test flight reports. The Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service, IGNAS, tasked their most experienced fighter pilots, men who had hundreds of kills and an almost superstitious reverence for their own skill, to fly the B-17 and, crucially, to observe it being attacked by their own Zeros. The objective was not to learn how to bomb, but how to kill the bomber. The test pilot chosen for the B-17 was likely a veteran of the New Guinea campaign, perhaps even one who had encountered the Yankee Doodle itself. Imagine the scene. A slender, highly trained Japanese pilot, accustomed to the nimble controls of a Zero, now strapped into the vast, heavy cockpit of the American behemoth, sitting in the pilot's seat while a team of Japanese gunners, painstakingly trained to operate the alien Sperry controls, manned the turrets. The mock interception began. Zeros flashed past, simulating the attack runs the Japanese had perfected. From the cockpit of the B-17, the Japanese test pilot witnessed the efficiency of the defense firsthand. When a Zero came in fast and hard on the 6 o'clock position, the ball turret did not merely follow. It tracked, computed, and, in the live fire tests, poured a focused stream of 50 caliber tracers directly into the calculated point of intersection. A captured debriefing note, reportedly from one of the supervising officers, is the heart of this chapter's revelation. The pilots admitted they had never seen fire control like it. They had believed the American gunners were merely lucky. They were not lucky. They were calculated. They were inevitable. The sheer sustained volume of fire was one thing, but the precision at distance was the psychological hammer blow. The Japanese pilots realized that at 300 to 400 yards, a distance they felt was safe for their high-speed approach, the B-17's defensive fire was already zeroed in and computed. This changed the fear dynamic. Previously, a fighter pilot's fear was rooted in being outmaneuvered or outnumbered. Now the fear was rooted in the chilling realization that the machine itself was calculating their death. It was a dehumanizing threat, a technological predator that didn't panic, didn't tire, and didn't miss its trigonometry. The change in perspective was immediate. In the Pacific, the realization led to an urgent, frantic search for the B-17's true blind spots, the narrow cones of approach where the guns could not converge. They began advocating for coordinated, simultaneous attacks from above and below, splitting the focus of the gunners and forcing manual aiming. In the European theater, the Luftwaffe's intelligence division, having also studied a captured fortress, developed the infamous Zerstörergruppen, destroyer groups, using heavily armed twin-engine fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf-110 and, later, the terrifying use of rocket-propelled shells, Werfer 21. They recognized that the only way to beat the fire control was to hit the bomber outside the effective range of the 50 caliber guns, or to overwhelm it with a blast that negated the need for precision. This technological race had a profound human cost on both sides. For the Allied gunners, the B-17 was a sanctuary, but also a cage. The ball turret gunner, cramped into a tiny sphere, isolated and often unable to bail out, was a symbol of the war's industrial brutality. His determination was the human element underpinning the machine's efficiency. The Axis pilots, on the other hand, now faced a psychological barrier. They were no longer attacking brave but fallible young men. They were attacking a system of calculated lethality, forcing them to abandon their established, successful tactics and adopt extremely dangerous close-range maneuvering, a testament to the technological edge the Americans had secretly forged. The laughter was truly over. The intelligence garnered from the captured fortresses, the Type 101 in Japan, and the modified B-17F operating with Kampfgeschwader 200 in Germany, did not simply lead to marginal adjustments. It demanded a wholesale tactical overhaul across both the Luftwaffe and the Imperial Japanese Air Forces. The ingrained, successful methods of attacking less protected bombers were, in a stroke of mechanical genius, rendered suicidal. The analysis of the American fire control proved that the era of leisurely, low-risk engagement was emphatically over. The most immediate and radical change occurred in the Luftwaffe's intercept doctrine. Captured gunnery manuals and flight analysis confirmed that the B-17's most vulnerable area was its frontal arc, specifically the heavily laden engine nacelles and the cockpit, when viewed from a direct head-on approach. The bombardier's chin turret, the Bendix, was a threat, yes, but the overall convergence of fire from the nose, top and bottom was demonstrably less dense than the devastating crossfire available to the waist and tail gunners. The new German strategy, implemented ruthlessly by commanders like General Adolf Galland, was the head-on pass. German fighter pilots, flying the fast FW-190s and Bf-109s, were instructed to approach the B-17 formations from the front, flying directly through the tightly packed combat box at a terrifyingly high closure rate. The mathematics behind this maneuver were brutal. The combined speed of the bomber, approximately 200 mm, and the attacking fighter, approximately 350 mm, resulted in a closure rate exceeding 550 mm. The crucial window for the fighter pilot to aim and fire, to inflict critical damage before passing through the formation, was reduced to less than 2 seconds. This infinitesimal time slice was the only way to nullify the advantage of the B-17's calculating gunners, who needed time to acquire, track, and allow the Sperry system to compute the correct lead. It was a trade-off of profound consequences, higher lethality for the Germans, but at a vastly increased personal risk of mid-air collision or being caught in the dense defensive fire. Veteran pilots, the aces who had survived the Battle of Britain and the Eastern Front, balked at this near-suicidal tactic. It was like flying through a curtain of iron, recalled Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Lange. You committed completely, there was no turning back. If the gunner was slow, you won an engine. If he was fast, you lost your life. Yet the sheer necessity of stopping the relentless bomber streams enforced its adoption. The technological genius of the American gun sight had, through intelligence transfer, forced the Luftwaffe into a battle of nerves and momentum. In the distant Pacific, the Imperial Japanese, lacking the heavy cannon and rocket capability of the Luftwaffe, adapted the B-17's lessons in a different, more meticulous way. Facing the B-29 Superfortress later in the war, a direct, more heavily armed descendant of the B-17 design philosophy, they focused their efforts on altitude advantage and focused dive attacks. The Japanese tactic centered on utilizing the superior high-altitude performance of their specialized interceptors and targeting the B-17's known structural weaknesses. They would execute a high-angle dive from above or below, aiming to strike a critical component, a fuel tank, the vulnerable tail stabilizers, or the main wing spar, and then escape the lethal defensive perimeter quickly. They used smaller, faster projectiles, but sought higher precision. The B-17's defense was a grid. The Japanese sought to exploit the tiny gaps in that grid. This entire strategic shift represents the documentary's key arc of transformation. The B-17 began as a proud, if flawed, symbol of Allied strategic confidence, a machine designed to defend itself by fire saturation. Its capture and the subsequent forensic analysis forced the Axis to transition from attacking the concept of the bomber to attacking its precise, vulnerable technical specifications. They transformed from arrogant hunters to calculated assassins, forced to risk their lives in suicidal maneuvers to negate the enemy's automated advantage. The brutal irony is that the tactical adjustments made by the Luftwaffe and the INUS, the terrifying head-on pass and the extreme high-angle dive, while immediately effective in increasing bomber losses, also dramatically increased their own attrition rates and crippled their training pipeline. The bomber, even captured on the ground, was still exacting a price. The revelations from the Fortress test saved Allied crews not by changing the bomber's design overnight, but by making the enemy's interception tactics exponentially more desperate and dangerous to execute. The ultimate blood-soaked proof of the tactical shift forced by the B-17's technological secret came on October 14, 1943, a day the 8th Air Force grimly called Black Thursday. This second Schweinfurt raid represents the terrible climax where the Axis's new aggressive doctrine was tested against the relentless fortitude of the Allied crews and the limits of the flying fortress doctrine. On this mission, 291 B-17 fortresses of the US 8th Air Force were dispatched deep into the heart of the Reich, targeting the vital ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt. The Luftwaffe, having fully integrated the lessons of the captured B-17 and desperately needing to halt the daylight raids, launched an unprecedented, savage defense coordinated meticulously by ground control. They unleashed the head-on pass with terrifying and methodical effectiveness. Witnesses described the sky as an arena of chaos. The German pilots, driven by their new high-risk doctrine, flew straight into the formations, often sustaining damage from the bomber's immense closing fire. The Allied gunners, relying instinctively on the computed accuracy of their Sperry sights and the collective fear that drove them, fought back with unparalleled ferocity. Every burst of the 50 caliber fire was intended to calculate the Germans' trajectory and punish the invasion of the bomber's small defensive envelope. The battle raged for hours across the German landscape. Pivotal and brutal statistics. By nightfall, 30% of the B-17s were shot down, 60 bombers lost over enemy territory. The highest single mission loss of the war. The human cost was catastrophic. 594 American airmen were killed or captured. But the Luftwaffe also paid a crippling, strategically unsustainable price, losing an estimated 38 fighter aircraft, many of which were the highly trained pilots the Axis could ill afford to lose. This battle was the point of no return. It proved two things simultaneously. The Luftwaffe's new tactics were brutally effective, but the B-17's defense system was so lethal that the German cost of interception was unsustainable. The Axis could not maintain the loss rate of pilots and aircraft required to stop the daylight raids using the head-on pass, precisely because the B-17's fire control made every interception attempt a high-risk proposition. The American system, calculating death at 550 mph, was deadly, even when strategically overwhelmed. The primary historical legacy of the B-17's captured secrets is the strategic counter-response it forced upon the Allies. The staggering losses over Schweinfurt demonstrated, beyond doubt, that even with brilliant defensive technology, the flying fortress could not remain an unescorted weapon. The revelation of the B-17's inherent vulnerability to calculated high-speed frontal attacks ironically validated the need for the P-51 Mustang. The Mustang, with its laminar flow wing and Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, possessed the incredible range to escort the bombers all the way to Berlin and back. It was the strategic and operational answer to the head-on pass. The Mustangs engaged the German fighters, breaking up their coordinated attacks before they could initiate their lethal doctrine. The B-17's superior technology forced the enemy to develop tactics that could ultimately only be negated by another, superior piece of American technology, the long-range escort fighter. The story of the captured B-17, the Fortress Test, is not merely one of lost airmen and a downed plane. It is a profound historical lesson about the industrialization of conflict. The Axis pilots could master the art of flying and the skill of the dogfight, but the Americans had mastered the science of aerial warfare. The B-17 was not just a symbol of American resolve, it was a cold, calculated machine, armed with rudimentary computers that performed rapid-fire trigonometry under immense pressure. When the Axis flew it, they didn't just understand a new aircraft, they understood a new era of warfare, one where the machine's ability to compute the kill was a more reliable and lethal weapon than the pilot's ability to improvise. The confession of those Imperial Japanese pilots, shocked into chilling realization by the power of American fire control, stands as a quiet but devastating testament to the technological advantage that ultimately decided the sky above the world. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the technological battle of the skies. If you found this historical narrative compelling, make sure to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments about which Doitutu technology we should explore next, and subscribe to the channel for more immersive documentaries.